Rocco Vane, known in the shadows of Manchester as VanillaJerky, rose from the streets to rule a criminal empire, only to face betrayal, police traps, and a downfall no one saw coming. Please subscribe and share for daily new update of Serm's story, and watch till end. The streets of Manchester were alive with shadows, the kind that seemed to move even when no one was looking. Neon lights flickered on wet pavements, reflecting off puddles left by the evening rain. In these streets, life was a constant struggle, and survival often meant bending or breaking the law. Among the narrow alleys and crowded neighborhoods, a young boy named Rocco Vane learned quickly that the world was not kind to those without money, family, or connections. He grew up in a crumbling flat with peeling wallpaper and broken furniture, his mother working multiple jobs just to put food on the table, while his father had long disappeared into the underworld. From an early age, Rocco understood that if he wanted more than scraps, he had to take it himself. At first, his crimes were small and almost invisible. He would slip into corner shops, lift wallets, and steal packs of cigarettes, always careful not to get caught. Yet even in these petty acts, there was a spark of cleverness. He observed people closely, studied their movements, and learned how to anticipate the smallest mistakes. By the time he was 16, Rocco was no longer just a boy surviving. He had become a calculated presence in Manchester's underground. His reputation began to spread quietly among local criminals, whispered in the corners of dimly lit pubs and shadowed alleyways. People started to recognize the name, though few had ever seen him in person. It was not only fear that made him respected. There was a charisma to Rocco, a way of commanding attention without raising his voice. He could convince older, more experienced criminals to take him seriously, and he could make the law enforcement officers who crossed paths with him pause and rethink their assumptions. Rocco had learned early that power did not only come from violence. It also came from intelligence, timing, and an unshakable confidence that made people believe he was untouchable. Even as his influence grew, Rocco remained deeply aware of the dangers around him. Rival gangs prowled the same streets, and alliances shifted as quickly as the weather. Betrayal was always a risk, yet he seemed to move with a quiet fearlessness that drew people in rather than pushed them away. Friends, enemies, and strangers all found themselves watching, waiting to see what he would do next. Every alley became a stage, every night a test of his instincts. Despite the looming darkness of his environment, Rocco dreamed bigger than most. He did not want to remain a street-level thief or a foot soldier for someone else as empire. He wanted control, influence, and recognition. The streets had shaped him, but he was determined to shape the streets in return. Manchester had never seen anyone like Rocco Vane before, and the city was about to learn just how far a boy from nothing could rise, and how far he could fall. Rocco's first taste of real power came when he set his sights on a local gambling den known for its careless security and hidden cash stashes. It was the kind of place where luck flowed as freely as money, and where men believed themselves untouchable. Rocco watched for weeks, studying the comings and goings of guards, memorizing every corner, every weak lock, every blind spot in the cameras. To anyone else, the task might have seemed impossible for a boy barely old enough to drink, but Rocco thrived on the challenge. He had always understood that preparation was as important as courage, and in this case, both would determine whether he stepped into greatness or disappeared into obscurity. The night he chose was stormy, the wind howling through Manchester streets like a warning. Rain streaked the windows of the gambling den, and the patrons inside were too focused on cards and dice to notice a shadow slipping silently through the back alley. Rocco moved with precision, his heart steady despite the adrenaline that coursed through his veins. Every step was measured, every movement rehearsed. The door yielded easily, a minor flaw that could have been fatal if discovered too early. Within minutes, he had accessed the cash room, carefully placing stacks of money into a bag, his mind calculating how many seconds he had before anyone noticed. When the robbery was done, he melted back into the night as if he had never been there. The storm masked his escape, rain washing away the traces of his presence. By morning, the city buzzed with the news. A daring theft had shaken the gambling world, and no one had seen the thief. Rocco's name was whispered among the underground, not yet widely known, but spoken with curiosity and a hint of fear. Those who knew of him understood that this was no ordinary street kid. This was someone who could plan, execute, and vanish without leaving a trace. The heist brought more than money. It brought attention. Local criminals, previously indifferent to Rocco, began to see him as a rising force. They approached cautiously at first, testing his loyalty and resolve, but his calm confidence won them over. He was offered alliances, small opportunities to prove himself further, and for the first time, he felt the taste of real influence. Rocco now had a crew, a select group of young men who shared his ambition and his ruthlessness. Together, they started targeting other weak points in the city, small at first, building toward something larger, something that could not be ignored. With every successful move, Rocco's belief in himself grew. He no longer saw Manchester as a place to survive. He saw it as a playground, a chessboard on which he could maneuver, manipulate, and dominate. The streets that had once taught him fear now witnessed his rise. Every alley, every shadow, every whispered name added to the legend of Rocco Vane. From that night forward, he was no longer just a boy trying to escape poverty. He was a man shaping his destiny, one calculated risk at a time, and the city was starting to take notice. By the age of 22, Rocco Vane had transformed from a street-smart thief into the architect of a sprawling criminal empire. The Iron Fangs, his carefully selected crew, operated like clockwork under his command, each member understanding the unspoken rules of loyalty, fear, and reward. Manchester's Underworld was no longer just a chaotic collection of petty criminals and rival gangs. It had a ruler, and Rocco was determined to cement his control. His operations now stretched beyond small heists into the lucrative trades of drugs, illegal gambling, and protection rackets. Every corner of the city had a trace of his influence, whether through direct control or whispered fear of reprisal. Rocco's methods were both cunning and ruthless. He preferred intelligence over violence, manipulation over brute force. Every move he made was calculated, from who he allied with to which rival gangs were allowed to survive. He established a network of informants, street-level spies who fed him the movements of law enforcement and rival operators alike. The city's police forces were aware of his presence, but catching someone as elusive as Rocco proved nearly impossible. He seemed to anticipate their every strategy, slipping through raids and disappearing before arrests could be made. The more the authorities tried to tighten the net, the more he adapted, always 3 steps ahead. Despite the danger surrounding him, Rocco indulged in the trappings of his success. Luxury cars lined hidden garages, bespoke suits adorned his frame, and lavish parties were thrown in secret locations where the elite of Manchester's underworld mingled. But beneath the glittering surface lay a constant tension. Trust was rare, and betrayal even rarer, yet always lurking. Rocco knew that his position made him a target. The higher he climbed, the more eyes turned toward him, waiting for a misstep. His charisma kept his crew loyal, yet he never let his guard down, understanding that loyalty in the criminal world could be fleeting. The Iron Fangs became notorious, not only for their efficiency, but for their reputation as untouchable operators. Shops and clubs paid for protection without question, fearing what refusal might bring. Rival gangs who underestimated Rocco learned the hard way that ambition and cunning could be deadlier than raw strength. He had a talent for turning conflict into opportunity, using threats to consolidate power rather than simply destroy. By carefully balancing fear and respect, he maintained control over territories that others had long fought over. Yet even as his empire expanded, cracks began to show in the perfection he had built. The pressure of running multiple operations, staying ahead of law enforcement, and managing the ambitions of his crew weighed heavily on him. Paranoia crept in, subtle at first, but growing with every passing day. Whispers of betrayal were heard in the shadows, and Rocco's instincts told him that the higher he climbed, the harder the fall would be. Manchester had witnessed his rise, but the city had yet to see the price of ambition. One wrong decision, one misplaced trust, could unravel everything he had built. Rocco's empire had grown far beyond the streets he once ruled, and with growth came attention from forces he could no longer ignore. One evening, a discreet message arrived at one of his safe houses, carried by a man whose presence alone hinted at connections far beyond Manchester. The message was simple: opportunities for expansion, protection, and unprecedented wealth awaited if he aligned himself with a powerful Italian syndicate that was beginning to establish a foothold in the UK. Rocco recognized this as a turning point. The offer was tempting, but he knew that any alliance came with a cost. Every choice in the criminal world carried weight, and mistakes often proved fatal. Rocco studied the syndicate from afar, observing their operations and the men who ran them. They were ruthless, disciplined, and experienced in ways his street-trained instincts had never encountered. Yet there was something familiar in their method, a cold precision that mirrored his own approach to crime. He realized that partnering with them could elevate him from a local kingpin to a figure of national, even international, influence. But it also meant navigating a dangerous new web of loyalty, power, and betrayal. He could not afford missteps. The wrong alliance could destroy everything he had built. After careful consideration, Rocco decided to meet with the syndicate leaders in a neutral location far from the prying eyes of Manchester. The meeting was tense, full of unspoken threats and veiled promises. Every word was measured, every gesture scrutinized. In that room, he felt the gravity of what he was stepping into. The Italian contacts offered protection against rival gangs, access to lucrative smuggling routes, and the promise of wealth far beyond anything Manchester had seen. But the offer also came with expectations: loyalty above all else, obedience in operations, and the willingness to eliminate threats without hesitation. Rocco accepted the alliance, seeing it as the next stage in his rise. For a time, the partnership seemed mutually beneficial. Rocco's crews gained resources and intelligence that allowed them to expand operations more efficiently than ever. He enjoyed the thrill of outmaneuvering rivals who now seemed small and insignificant compared to the powerful network backing him. Yet the new alliance brought new dangers. Every deal, every shipment, every meeting was shadowed by the knowledge that one wrong step could spark retaliation from the syndicate or from those who resented his growing influence. As Rocco integrated his empire with the Italian syndicate's operations, subtle tensions began to emerge. Not all members of the Iron Fangs embraced the alliance. Some feared the loss of autonomy, while others envied the new attention Rocco received. Rival gangs, once manageable through fear and respect, started to plot more aggressively, emboldened by rumors of instability within his ranks. The delicate balance of power that Rocco had maintained for years became more fragile. Despite these pressures, Rocco thrived in the chaos. He had always believed that ambition required risk, and this alliance represented the greatest risk yet. The city of Manchester was no longer his only concern. His actions now resonated on a much larger scale. Every decision carried weight, and every move was scrutinized by unseen eyes. The streets he had once ruled so confidently had become a stage for larger forces, and Rocco was determined to prove that he could master them all. But in the shadows, danger was gathering, patient and unyielding, waiting for the moment to strike. For years, Rocco Vane had built his empire on careful planning, loyalty, and fear, but even the most meticulous plans can begin to crumble when ambition pushes limits too far. Subtle cracks started to appear in the foundation of the Iron Fangs. Rivalries that had been contained for years began resurfacing, fueled by jealousy and resentment among his own crew. Some members questioned his decisions, envious of the attention he received from the Italian syndicate. Others felt their contributions were undervalued, their loyalty taken for granted. These whispers, small at first, grew louder with each passing day, infecting the trust that had once been unshakable. Meanwhile, the authorities had intensified their pursuit. Law enforcement had been quietly gathering evidence, using informants to track Rocco's movements and operations. Every successful heist, every expansion into a new illegal market, drew attention like a magnet. The very strategies that had kept him untouchable now served as breadcrumbs leading the police ever closer. Surveillance, intercepted communications, and undercover officers were slowly weaving a web that even Rocco's instincts began to recognize. He felt it in fleeting glances from old allies, in unexpected changes in routine, and in the sudden caution of those around him. The tension inside the Iron Fangs reached a critical point during a series of high-stakes deals. Decisions that had once been straightforward now required constant vigilance. Rocco's orders were challenged more openly than ever before, subtle defiance bubbling under the surface. Some members, motivated by greed or fear, began making moves that jeopardized the carefully constructed operations. Contracts were delayed, shipments went missing, and minor skirmishes with rival gangs escalated beyond expectation. Each incident added a layer of stress, and Rocco's once unshakable confidence began to show signs of strain. It was not only internal threats that posed danger. The Italian syndicate, while powerful, was also demanding. Their support came with expectations, and any misstep could have deadly consequences. They were growing impatient with delays and inefficiencies, watching carefully to see if Rocco could maintain control over both his crew and the city. Every alliance had its price, and Rocco could feel the invisible weight of obligations tightening around his neck. One wrong move could undo years of work and bring both betrayal and violence to his doorstep. Despite the mounting pressure, Rocco refused to slow down. Ambition had always been his driving force, and he believed that he could overcome any challenge through cunning and force of will. He pushed his crew harder, demanded loyalty, and tried to anticipate every threat before it became dangerous. Yet the city around him was changing faster than he could adapt. Old rivals were no longer afraid to act, new enemies were rising, and the law was more organized than ever. The delicate balance of power that had allowed him to dominate Manchester for years was starting to tip, and Rocco was beginning to understand that survival in the criminal world was no longer guaranteed. The cracks in the armor were small but growing, like hairline fractures in stone, barely noticeable at first. But in the world Rocco had created, even the tiniest flaw could expand into a catastrophe. As tension mounted inside the Iron Fangs and danger lurked on every corner, the stage was being set for a moment that could destroy everything he had fought so hard to build. The rise of Rocco Vane was approaching a turning point, and the shadows of Manchester were preparing to claim him. Rocco Vane had faced countless dangers, but nothing would test him like the heist he now planned. It was ambitious, audacious, and potentially catastrophic, the kind of job that could either cement his empire forever or destroy it in a single night. An armored transport, rumored to be carrying millions in cash, became the target. For weeks, Rocco and his crew studied every detail: the vehicle's route, the guards' shifts, traffic patterns, and even the surrounding neighborhoods. Every possible risk was considered, every contingency calculated. Confidence coursed through him. He had pulled off impossible feats before, and he believed nothing could stop him now. On the night of the heist, Manchester streets were unusually quiet, the kind of silence that feels like a warning. Rain-slicked roads reflected the amber glow of streetlights as Rocco positioned his team near the armored transport's scheduled route. Each member moved like a shadow, perfectly in sync, trained to execute their roles without hesitation. The tension was palpable. Adrenaline and fear intermingled as they waited for the armored vehicle to appear. Every second seemed to stretch, every sound magnified. For Rocco, years of preparation, experience, and instinct converged in this single moment. When the transport finally arrived, the plan began flawlessly. Guards were neutralized quickly and efficiently, and the money was loaded onto waiting vehicles. For a moment, victory seemed inevitable. Rocco allowed himself the briefest flicker of satisfaction. This would be his greatest achievement yet, a feat that would solidify his control over Manchester's criminal underworld. His mind raced with possibilities, expansion, alliances, power that would reach far beyond the city. For once, he felt untouchable. Then the unexpected happened. A betrayal, subtle but devastating, shattered everything. One of his closest lieutenants, someone Rocco had trusted implicitly, had been feeding information to law enforcement. Police vehicles, hidden until this moment, surged into the area from side streets. The ambush was sudden, perfectly timed, leaving Rocco and his crew scrambling. Chaos erupted. Cars collided, men ran in every direction, and shouts filled the night air. The meticulous planning that had defined Rocco's rise crumbled in an instant. Rocco barely escaped the scene, his body and mind pushed to the limit. The heist, which was meant to cement his empire, had instead exposed its vulnerability. Money was lost, trust was shattered, and the sense of invincibility that had driven him for years evaporated. For the first time, Rocco realized that power could be fleeting, that every move carried consequences that even he could not control. The streets that had once bowed to his influence now seemed hostile, unforgiving, and unpredictable. In the aftermath, Manchester buzzed with rumors. The Iron Fangs, once untouchable, were wounded and scattered. Allies questioned loyalties, enemies grew bolder, and the police were emboldened by the success of their ambush. Rocco, once a symbol of control and fear, now found himself on the run, his empire teetering on the edge of collapse. The heist that had promised glory instead marked the beginning of the end. For Rocco Vane, the night that was meant to define his legacy became the moment when his downfall began, setting in motion a chain of events that no amount of cunning or ambition could reverse. The fall of Rocco Vane was swift, inevitable, and absolute. After months of paranoia, betrayal, and near misses, law enforcement finally closed the net around him. It was not a dramatic shootout or a high-speed chase that ended his reign, but a calculated operation based on intelligence and meticulous planning. Milo Santoro's betrayal had provided the authorities with the information they needed to corner Rocco, leaving him with nowhere to hide. Every street, every alley, and every safe house he once controlled was under surveillance, and the empire he had built over years collapsed like sand slipping through fingers. Rocco's capture was almost anticlimactic. Surrounded in a quiet warehouse on the outskirts of Manchester, he was forced to surrender. The weapons, the cash, and the evidence of his operations were all seized, leaving nothing but the hollow shell of a once powerful figure. In that moment, the boy who had once survived on the streets, the man who had built an empire through fear and cunning, realized the full cost of ambition. He had escaped danger countless times before, but this time, the consequences of trust misplaced, loyalty broken, and enemies underestimated had finally caught up with him. The trial that followed was a spectacle, attracting attention from across the country. Witnesses testified against him, some former allies eager to distance themselves, others seeking leniency. The media painted him as both a cunning mastermind and a cautionary tale, a man who had risen to the heights of power only to be brought down by the same world he sought to control. Sentencing was severe. Decades in prison stripped him of freedom, and the empire that had once made him untouchable was dismantled piece by piece. Those who had once feared him now watched as his influence faded into history. In prison, Rocco had time to reflect on his choices, the paths that had led him to power, and the mistakes that had precipitated his downfall. He understood that ambition without caution, loyalty without verification, and confidence without humility had been his undoing. The city he had once ruled continued without him, the streets moving on, while the legend of VanillaJerky, the name whispered in fear during his rise, transformed into a story of warning for the next generation of would-be criminals. Yet, even in downfall, the name Rocco Vane carried weight. In the shadows of Manchester, his story remained a symbol of power, cunning, and ultimate vulnerability. Some spoke of him with admiration for his audacity, others with disdain for the chaos he had unleashed. The empire he had built was gone, but its memory lingered, a reminder that crime, no matter how carefully executed, always carries a price. Manchester never forgot the rise and fall of VanillaJerky. From a boy surviving in alleys, to a man commanding an empire, and finally to a prisoner stripped of everything he had fought for, Rocco Vane's story became legend. The streets had tested him, shaped him, and ultimately claimed him. His rise had been meteoric, but his fall was a lesson etched into the very fabric of the city. Power is fleeting, betrayal is inevitable, and even the most untouchable figures are only human. The shadow of Rocco Vane remained long after he was gone, a story of ambition, danger, and the cost of ruling the underworld.